Hi guys, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now today we're talking to a hugely inspiring figure within the UK ecology scene. Someone who enjoys disrupting the market, doing things differently on a big and ambitious scale. Professor David Hill CBE is chairman and founding owner of the Environment Bank, which he set up because of his concerns at the way wildlife was being treated within the planning and development sector. Now, in this episode, we cover a lot of ground and discuss the work of ecological consultants and the constraints they often face when working within a set area of land, often termed the development boundary. Now, David talks about his innovative work seeking to secure payments from developers to establish large-scale and long-term conservation areas separate from development sites, which really help nature to flood back into our landscapes on a scale not seen before, helping to pay for rewilding projects and others just like them. He also announces the exciting news that he's currently seeking to hire people to join him at the Environment Bank following a recent large investment of funds. And it's worth mentioning that David also helped me to get my first job out of university nearly 20 years ago, where I worked as an ecological consultant for the company he set up and later sold on. He's a great guy. As always, it's a wide-ranging, inspiring and hugely enjoyable discussion.
So I'm David Hill. I'm an ecologist. I started my career. I did my first degree in animal plant ecology in the last millennium, long time ago, I did a doctorate at the Edward Grey Institute of Field Ornithology at Oxford University, which has stayed with me as a network ever since. I mean, amazing place and amazing people that I met. So that was a great thing in terms of careers advice, is where you go and the networks you make are fabulous. Just very quickly, I then joined the Game Conservancy as it was then, and did research on game birds and waterfowl population dynamics. And I then went to the RSPB to run the science on all their reserves, which was great fun. And again, fantastic organization with fantastic networking opportunities. And then finally, I worked for the British Trust for Ornithology and as a director of development, which sort of brought me into the world of fundraising, which at that time I didn't actually like at all, I have to say. And I think interesting in terms of career development, there are things that you'll do which you won't like, and you get out of them. But they are really great experiences as well. You've got to have the good with the bad, and brilliant organization that it is. I didn't necessarily enjoy my time as much as I might have done. Having said that, I was responsible for moving them from Tring in Hertfordshire to Norfolk, and that was great. And again, great people, but it was time for me at that time to move on. So I then set up Ecoscope Applied Ecologists as a test to see if I could actually make a business out of ecology back in the days before there were really any environmental consultants or ecological consultants at all, and built that up from nothing really, working out of a back bedroom, to building a big office and taking on lots of people, and then finally selling that to a PLC called the RPS Group, which was a wonderful thing for me to do, and I enjoyed it, and I stayed with them for 4 years. I should have stayed for 2, but I sort of hung around for a bit longer. And then I decided that, I just really got very frustrated at how the ecological profession, as it was then growing big, and we had the Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management as it was then, how it was actually going. It wasn't, in my view, doing a great deal for biodiversity conservation. And I got into this whole thing from my interest in wildlife at the age of 5, really. I know, like most people, I think, they don't necessarily see it as a career path. They basically just like to get paid for doing what they enjoy. And that's entirely me. I've always wanted, I've always done only things I enjoy, not other things. And so anyway, I got to the situation where by about 2006, I didn't think we were delivering anything for biodiversity conservation. And so I, through the ecological consultancy profession, working for developments, etc., we weren't really doing a great deal. And so I'd set up the Environment Bank with the idea of bringing the concept of biodiversity offsetting and gains for biodiversity from development, so that developers could discharge their liability, do what they can do within a boundary of a site, but not try and get so constrained and messing around delivering fragments of value to biodiversity. So set up the Environment Bank in 2006, 2007. Yeah,
jump in on that bit if I can.
Yeah,
this whole drive of the Environment Bank seems to be around net biodiversity gain, if I've got this right, and biodiversity offsetting. These are kind of two key terms which you're going to use a lot, I guess, during this discussion. What do we mean about that? What can you sort of provide an example of what that means?
Well, we know on the ground. I basically realised that developments were having an impact on biodiversity. So you go through the route of trying to mitigate for that impact, and you do all sorts of various things within the development site boundary. You put it all down in reports and papers, and it goes through public inquiry as it used to do in those days. But actually, the key for me was to actually understand the impacts you're having, do what you can within the boundary of a site, but don't try and constrain everything, because you can actually look at offsetting the impacts that you can't deal with on site in a way that has value to biodiversity.
So that's the key thing. There's a site that's been developed that has a boundary around it. Within that, a developer wants to do something, build houses, put in a gas power plant, whatever it might be. There's maybe protected species or habitats there, and you can do some, let's call it, playing around within that boundary to try and minimize or offset or whatever, mitigate. But if you just constrain yourself within the site, and it might have sort of fairly limited value. But what you're talking about is, can you do something off-site that creates a bigger net benefit?
So I started with the idea that I could try and buy land and put it into conservation, that in the parlance developers could buy credits for, which are like carbon credits in one way, but in my view more tangible than carbon. And the idea was that we'd buy land and we put it into conservation, sell the credits to developers. Really bad idea that was, because land very rarely comes on the market. In the agricultural land, very rarely comes on the market. If it does come on the market, it's almost always in the wrong place. So the way we're doing it now in the Environment Bank, which is much more sophisticated but much more sensible, is that we look to take interests in land that the landowners still own, and we enter contracts with those landowners to deliver according to what we want.
So they own the land and you come in and advise on
entirely. And we quickly realized that landowners didn't want to sell land. And neither would I. We've bought a couple of small farms now, and we don't want to sell them. We actually would like to increase them if we can. So that mentality is clear, but I didn't have the experience at the time to understand that. And so the idea is that we're not disengaging with the developer. Far from it. We're actually providing an end-to-end solution now, so that the developer can measure the impacts, do what they can within the boundary of a site, but don't try or buy credits to create these big places which are between 40 and 100 hectare sites, which are big, really, in the scheme of things. And they then buy credits into those, and you end up with something much more valuable. But sorry, Nick.
We just lost the audio there briefly as well at a kind of a key moment. Got you back. Okay. You were just explaining, that so again, developers got a site, they want to, they're working within that site, they're trying to mitigate and minimize as much as possible, but they want to do more to meet this net gain. So they actually leave things better than when they found them. Ultimately, you provide this end-to-end solution with sites away from the development that the developer can invest in, essentially, and help to grow. And how does that credit bit work? I mean, we use the word credit, but what exactly does that mean?
It's a strange term. We like the term. It's similar to the situation that operates in the United States, really, where we go and enter into a contract with the landowner, and we write a management plan, and that generates the number of credits on that 40 or up to 100 hectare site, and we can then put all that into governance documents that we then sell legally through to the developer, and they just pay the money over to us. That goes into a separate independent account, and then we then fund the landowner for 30 years. So we pay them to do all the habitat creation up front, and we then pay them annually for meeting the objectives of the management plan. So it's all enforced by us, and all policed by us, which of course the on-site mitigation never is, because the planning authorities, once they've given the planning permission, they basically walk away from it. They don't have the resource to go and check what's happening. But just rolling back a little bit, there's a bit of history to this, because when I sort of set up the idea, there was a lot of pushback, because people thought, well, developers could just buy their way out of trashing everything, and that's was never the idea, and it would never happen if you've got good planning rules. And we don't see that, actually. What you see is that it's an ability for them to do the development, but without actually giving them any license to do developments where they wouldn't normally be able to be done. So you wouldn't normally be expected to build on an SSSI, thank goodness. That would be horrendous. And we know all the sort of challenges around that people bring to bear, which is a great thing, legal challenge. But you would be able to develop certain areas within the boundary of the development site. It's usually large arable fields for housing schemes or warehouses or sheds, and then looking at infrastructure, etc. And we spent a lot of time really lobbying government, and we had some fantastic MPs that were very keen on the idea and got behind it. But I would say that I've now been speaking to 16 ministers of state about it, and so one lesson I learned is that this was never going to be a quick fix. No. It was always going to be a long burn. It took longer than I hoped and expected, I have to say. But in fact, it was probably David Cameron and his team, and then most recently Richard Benyon, very, very keen on the whole idea and gets it, and he's a passionate conservationist himself. Those are the people that really saw the light for it, and we're able to sort of get government behind it, which has effectively got us to the position where it's going to be mandated into law at the back end of this year.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, does it from a political point of view sort of enable development to happen a bit more freely, but at the same time enable conservation to have more impact? Is it sort of like a bit of a double win?
I think it's a double win, but it's more to do with, rather than more freely, I think it's more quickly.
Right. Yeah.
One thing that concerned me, I mean, I have to say, and I'm sure many people won't agree with me on this, but I spent a lot of my early career in this, writing endless big reports on ecological impact assessment and representing them at public inquiry, and then getting the development through, then for the biodiversity and ecology really to be effectively watered down and dismissed post permission. And I can't hand on heart say I'm proud of many of the jobs that we were involved with, because they just, excuse me, for me, they didn't deliver what they really ought to. Apart from when you get an excellent client, we had Essex and Suffolk Water, part of the Northumbrian Water Group, who, and it was a long project, started in 2014, and then it really is just finished, which was to do with the raising of water in the Aberton Reservoir scheme. And they took it all on board, and we did it without a public inquiry, which was spectacular. And it's now probably the best inland site for waterfowl in the whole of the country, water birds in the whole of the country. But that's a rare. In many cases, people within the development sector move on. So you build a great relationship with one of them who really wants to do something. Somebody else comes in, look at bottom line, and it's always the environmental stuff that goes. I'm sorry to say it. And that's why I felt we've got to offset a lot of this, because it's the only way to take the issue away from the developer, let them get on with what they do best, which is the development, and then let us and people like us do what we do best, which is to create the nature conservation space. And from that, of course, we had the Making Space for Nature report, which was, a government initiative brilliantly chaired by John Lawton, and all of that, which has actually shown, what we've got to do to restore biodiversity. And I suppose what my focus has been on now, or from literally for the last 8 or 9 years, has been about making nature economically visible.
Yeah.
Because if you can do that, people then start to take you seriously.
Yeah.
And I'm not convinced as ecologists we've actually done a great deal to help biodiversity. I mean, the figures on biodiversity loss are there for all to see, 60% decline, etc. But I do think that we are now about to turn a tide. It's been raised on the agenda along with climate change as the two existential threats. Biodiversity loss is one of them, one of those two. And if we're going to do nature recovery at scale, we can only do it if we get private investment into private land holdings. We can't do it through relatively small scale setting up of small nature reserves with the Wildlife Trust. They do a great job, but it's a massive task as this. And so part of my career development really has been to get the landowners to really engage, and you do that through developing income streams. And that's what we've done with this. And as soon as you do that, they see the light and they're really keen, and they get on with it. And that's why we're now setting up large numbers of habitat banks across the country.
And what does an ideal piece of land look like for you? I'm thinking that you want something ideally that's quite large, and something which shows great potential. You don't necessarily want something that's already fantastic for wildlife. Is that right? Because the credits are all based on improvement. Strangely
enough, you actually want, and I really like this idea. You actually want something that's as bad for wildlife now as it possibly could, and that really is effectively modern farmed arable land, which is dreadful. I mean, the whole large parts of the country are green deserts for wildlife because of the modernization that was. The way farming has gone, which is the farming sector is really in the hands of the agricultural machinery, seed and chemical manufacturers. They seem to be the only people that make money out of farming. If you look at the externality damage that farming does, it's extraordinary. So for me, it's yes, we've got to feed ourselves, obviously, but for me, it's about looking at arable farmland. And engaging with the landowner who really does want to do things differently in many cases. And that's where you get your biggest raise of conservation credits, from taking that arable farmland. And often it might be grade 3, grade 4 rather than grade 1 and grade 2 for obvious reasons. And then you look at transitioning that to, the best habitat types for biodiversity are things like woodland scrub with grassland mosaics. But we also see a real role actually for rewilded sites in the right place and the right locations. And I've seen and visited some phenomenal sites that take me back to a kid really of what I remember of wildlife populations. And
can you give us an example of one? What stands out in your memory?
Well, I remember at the age of about 11, I remember going to a local farm, and in the middle of a field was an old threshing machine, which actually wasn't that old at the time, I think. And I went with a sack and I collected a whole sack full of weed seeds from that threshing machine when they just cut the corn, cut the wheat, to feed the birds back home. Well, you'd be hard pushed to get a whole sack from a whole farm anywhere now because it's been so sterilized.
Interesting.
And that's actually led part of my career into looking at how we need to transition agriculture. So I sit on the Food Farming Countryside Commission trying to look at, agroecological approaches to farming. So getting away from this intensification, again, with fairly broad approaches to pesticide use, which are creating these deserts. And I've been to visit places where they're looking at regenerative agriculture, alongside rewilded parts of the site. And actually, when they start to do this, suddenly the farm economics start to stack up, and they can actually make profit by not spending money on inputs.
Presumably, and then you've got sustainable, predictable income once you get into these.
And it's a predictable income. So you're not spending a huge amount like they do at the moment on large machinery and chemicals. It's much more targeted. They're even stopping ploughing in this one place I've seen in North Norfolk, and they've got reintroduction programs going on, and big sites that they're looking at. And this is the future, because it takes me back to what I can remember as a kid as to what the hedgerows are full of wildlife, the fields are full of wildflowers, They were great places. And really interestingly, and I've spoken about this on numerous occasions, the young guys, the young ecologists that are there ready to set their careers up now, are their view of the environment of the baseline is vastly different to mine, and I'm sure mine is going to be vastly different to David Attenborough's, for example, who's a little bit older than me, and so on. And so we've gone through. So you've basically had, as Jared Diamond terms it, creeping normalcy. Yeah. So things appear normal and it creeps along and you don't realize the change that's happened. And landscape amnesia, you forget what the landscape really would have been like. And I'm really passionate about that. I really want to see us get back to a much more varied, diverse landscape structure, much more varied, diverse cropping regimes, and much more varied and diverse land cover types, which includes big tracts of wilded land and big tracts of wildflower meadows, woodland scrub, etc. But somebody's got to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And you're trying to sort of square that circle, if you like, through these development credits and working outside the boundary. It sounds really exciting. If I gave you 1,000 hectares of arable land in Norfolk, what would you do with it? How would you plan for what wildlife value you're looking to improve within that site, and then how would you enable it, and how quick would you hope to see species come back?
Well, I'd have to say that some of it I'd put into a regenerative agricultural system. Some of it I'd put into some form of rewilded approach, although 1,000 acres, if you partitioned it up 30, 30, 30, or 33%, etc. That's still going to give you 300 hectares, let's say hectares, it's a bigger area, to do your rewilding on, which is still not a lot, but it's better than 10 hectares in a way. But even those 10 hectares can be brilliant. You can do it in a certain way. I suppose the terminology for rewilding means many things to many people. Excuse me, but I think that having rewilding somewhere with regenerative agriculture, and then more strictly defined management interventions. So I'd go for woodland scrub with grassland mosaics or wildflower meadows. I think that's what I definitely do. And if you got that 3-part combination, but of course somebody's got to be paying for that rewilded work, and somebody's got to be paying for the management interventions that is not the agricultural, not generating income from agriculture. And I think there's a huge value in the potential for nature-based tourism now, much more so than there was a few years ago. And I think that's where a lot of
these estate right here in the UK, which rewilding Isabella tree, and there's been an enormous resurgence of interest in that idea because of that book and that estate, which you can now visit as a tourist and go and see what's happened. And that happened all quite quickly, as far as I'm aware.
Well, I mean, sort of Izzy and Charlie Knepp, have shown that actually, the one thing you can't guarantee is the trajectory that the rewilded site will go along.
Right. Yeah.
What you can guarantee is that you'll get structural development, which then increases through the soil structure right the way through to vegetation structure. As that transitions to a higher climax vegetation type, you'll get a change in the species that come in, but it's basically getting the invertebrates in, I guess, and then getting the species that then feed on the invertebrates, etc., to the top predators. And of course, big problem in this country is we've lost all our top predator. We are the top predator. And so you then start to get into issues around should we be managing some of the generalist predators such as foxes, carrion crows, magpies that would have normally been taken out by some of the big guys, some of the big top predators, the white-tailed eagles and the and other species, and obviously wolves originally, of course. I don't necessarily see we'll get wolves back. Maybe Scotland potentially, but so there is a real place for rewilded or wilding sites. But actually, I think a vast amount of the land cover will be a balance between obviously growing food, using new agricultural innovations, and whether we like it or not, but gene modification will probably be the way we'll actually achieve a lot of that
more efficient
agricultural, more efficient, but also an ability to enable us to target pest species more sustainably, rather than the broader brush approach that we use now. And all of that's now just come together in the last 4 or 5 years, which is incredibly good news, and gives us reason for hope. But I do hope that, the farming sector can rise to the challenge, because I think that, particularly with if there was any one potentially good thing that comes out of Brexit, and I might show my colours on that, it is that we're transitioning basic payment scheme away, getting rid of it, the farm subsidy, because I personally don't believe that there should be that level of subsidy in that industry. No other industry receives it, really, and it's much better that farmers can provide things that society and people want, and to do that and to get paid properly for it, not through a grant, but paid properly for it. And that's the transition that we want to see. And of course, the Biodiversity Net Gain initiative will feed into that. But then there's a much bigger market, we think, in the corporate natural capital accounts market. So, I'm predicting that within 3 years, major corporates will be measuring their impacts on natural capital throughout their whole supply chain. And then they'll be looking to reduce their impacts on natural capital and natural resources in that supply chain. And where they can't reduce it, very similar to where a developer can't reduce an impact on his development, they should be able to buy credits to offset those impacts, to put money into nature-based mechanisms, and natural solutions and land management interventions that rebuild the fabric of the British countryside and beyond, obviously. But I think that will come through. And the drivers for that will be the investment fund managers, the people that invest in the big corporates. So if you're a big corporate and you're a bit of a laggard and you're not engaging with natural capital disclosure and accounting for it in your annual reports, you'll find it difficult to achieve investment. If on the other hand, you're really at the front of the queue, you'll find it easy to get investment, and those companies will be ones that will grow. And I think that we're already starting to see that scale now, and it's fascinating to see.
That is really fascinating. It feels like you're very optimistic and hopeful about the sort of pivotal point we're at right now. From a biodiversity viewpoint, things have got quite bad, but actually now we've got the systems, things like credits, the laws are in place, the net biodiversity, gain. And also, through your work at the Environment Bank, you have this bank as well, growing network of sites where, basically developers and wider corporations can start investing in this and growing this at scale and building off the back of things like Rewilding, which has been huge. Are you now really, where do you see things 10, 20, 30 years from now? Are we at the bottom of the dip?
I think we are. I think we are at the bottom, and it's a big dip. The losses to biodiversity are phenomenal. I mean, it's just extraordinary that, and difficult actually to explain to younger generations of ecologists what things were like, even in my lifetime. And I'm not that old, but I am old, but not that old. So I am hopeful. But there is only there. We've got to be hopeful, because if we don't, we go into despair, and we would let everything just take hold of further environmental degradation. But what's happening politically in the Amazon, and what's happening in parts of Africa, and what's happening with potential investments from Asia into countries that are destroying the planet. We've got to stop this stuff. So I suppose my only regret is that I am older. And I'd like to be in my 20s again, because I think actually now's the time to get on with this stuff, and the young generation to look at what they can achieve with the legacy of devastation that we've created, actually, to be honest. And science, I think, will play a great part. So agricultural innovations are going to be science-led and technology-led, no doubt about that. Technology all the way around, looking at what populations of species of animals do through satellite tracking. All of this is coming to the fore. So we can use we have lots of tools, and we have lots of great thinkers as well. Some of the great work, for example, that the Sustainable Food Trust is doing at looking how you get food, but you're not maximizing yield just to produce cheap food. You're producing quality food. And that's got to be something that we in the UK embrace, because we've got problems. We've got a major problem with our food system and our diets, and so it's all interlinked. So biodiversity, food, diet, what the countryside looks like, how people engage with it, is all interlinked. And then sitting above all that are the people, the new generation of ecologists that can get to grips with this. And so I suppose I'd say, sort of moving on maybe to the career side of things, I suppose I'd say it's exciting times for you young ecologists. It really is. And, because of the techno stuff and because of the reliance on science and the actual value that's now given to ecology and the environment. When I set up Ecoscope all those years ago, it was pretty. And when I actually started doing a degree in ecology, there weren't such things. There's only 1 or 2 in the country. That's changed dramatically. So we've got all the courses, we're producing lots of people. We've actually got to get the ideas and put the people into practice and actually get some of those ecologists as politicians as well, so that they can understand this. And it isn't just a balancing act. If we get the biodiversity loss bit wrong, then really we don't have an environment. We could fix climate change, but if biodiversity loss continues, it's not going to help us. And I think it's a very exciting time to be an ecologist. And that's why, we, in our own small way, we've just received a massive investment into the Environment Bank. And then in our own small way, we're going to be taking on more ecologists, quite a lot more ecologists. And I would say it's not doing the traditional ecological consultancy stuff on the sort of newt licensing and all the sort of protected species, which is really important. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But we're looking at wanting to create big scale habitat things on the back of the development sector, but then moving into the corporate sector, where we're not necessarily as reliant on creating these habitat banks within a distance from a development site or within a local planning authority boundary. Yeah. We're looking at bigger scale, off grid almost, where we can deliver some great biodiversity for future generations to enjoy. I suppose, can I just say one final thing on this? And I've said that we've got to make nature economically visible, and I fundamentally believe that. But actually, there's too much rhetoric at the moment around creating nature for people. That's really important. But actually, what? We should be creating and rebuilding nature for nature's own sake. Yep. I don't think we have a remit just to do it because it gives us benefit. That's the next big idea. Yeah. But I think it's wrong for us to just do it just because we as humans want to do it for ourselves. We have a duty, I think, as the sort of supposedly most sophisticated species on the planet to do it and remove our impacts on other species, which have just got as much right to live on the planet as we have, in my view.
Nature for nature's sake, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that leads me, as we sort of wrap up, to ask a little bit more about, what advice would you give young ecologists? You talked a minute ago, about, if you're 20 now, it's a great opportunity, a good time to be kind of getting stuck in and trying to make a difference to biodiversity here in the UK and more globally. But what advice would you give either your 20-year-old self or young 20-year-olds right now, graduating in the next few years as ecologists or, related, coming into the sector, to the movement? What jobs are out there? What skills should they be developing within themselves to become employable?
Well, I think the skills are going to be around technology, the application of technology, and that's to do with sort of remote sensing and understanding how different systems operate. So getting to grips with what the agricultural systems are out there, how do they function? Getting some experience of land-based management interventions as well. So getting some experience on landowning land or landowners' land, potentially. Certainly working for ecological consultants or environmental consultants is brilliant. But at a personal level, that's why I left that sector in a way and went into what we're doing now. Don't give up on the passion for nature conservation. And don't give up on the view that you have to do ecology in a certain way to get development sort of permitted. There are better and alternative ways at achieving the development, but at the same time giving greater value to biodiversity. So offsite biodiversity, I think, is going to be the future, really. And do as much reading you can about a whole range of things to ensure that you start to fit the jigsaw together. One thing that we find is often that people are really good at their specific niche work, but they can't put it into the context of the wider land use scenarios. It's a bit alien, and I think that's an important thing to do, is to understand how land use works in this country, which then involves economics. So you can't ignore economics if you're looking at ecological restoration and environmental enhancement and overall nature recovery.
Now, you mentioned also you've had quite a big investment into the Environment Bank recently, and that you have roles available as well. I want to kind of just touch on that as well. So who are you looking for right now, and what sort of skills, what sort of roles are available?
So we're looking for really high-end, highly competent project advisors, but at project advisor, senior and principal level. We're also looking for a technical director in ecology. And these are, with various levels of experience, but really good, solid, forward-thinking people who've got good ideas. Also really passionate to get people who share our ethos and philosophy. So see how to do things in a novel and different way. How do we disrupt the ecological consultancy sector to deliver more value for biodiversity? I think that's really important. We're also looking for commercial managers, believe it or not, as an ecological business. It's bizarre that maybe, but we're looking for commercial managers for working with developers, landowners, and planning authorities. So we're looking for those. And then we've got a whole range of back office infrastructure people that we're going to be taking on to support this, so that it's effectively a pretty frictionless business model that we're rolling out. So yeah, we're looking for, if people wanted to really join, what I'm obviously going to say is, a fantastic business opportunity. And I think, we'll look back in 5 years and think, it was a real struggle, actually, the last 13 years, getting the thing from an idea into law. I suppose I underestimated it, how difficult it would be. But now we've done it, I think, well, we've almost done it. It's got to have the enactment of the Environment Bill, but hopefully everyone will behave and it will go through. It'd be political suicide if it doesn't, I think. But anyway, that model now is ready to roll out at scale. And the only thing that will restrict how much land we can put funding into will be around our own ambition for success. And our ambition for success is massive. And we've got a fantastic chief executive on board who knows how to run things big. Yeah. And, so the opportunities for people to join us, I think, are huge.
That sounds really exciting. That's great. And
thanks, Nick. Yeah.
I know that if people want to find out more particularly about the roles, they will direct them to JSM Associates, who are your recruiting partner. Yeah. We'll put a link, below the podcast. But if you Google JSM Associates, you'll find the roles that are currently available. And if people just want to find out a bit more about the Environment Bank more generally, where should we direct them? Just
straight to our website, so www.environmentbank.com.
Fantastic.
And lots of resources on there as well. So yeah.
Right. Well, we'll also provide a link to that too, so people can just straight off and can read out a bit more about your work. It's been an enormous pleasure reconnecting
likewise.
And talking again about your work. And I'm so excited just hearing about what you're doing. And the moment that you're at, I think, with the development of all this work around nature credits and net biodiversity gain. So let's see where it goes in the next few years. Good luck and thank you again, Nick, for your time.
Thanks, Nick, and good luck to you too. Good to see you again.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also please give us a rating or a review, because it really helps us to get in front of more people. Now, if you want our help to get clear and get started and get hired as a professional conservationist, I recommend you enroll in our free online training program, exploring how to get a conservation job. So if you're a student, a job seeker, or a career switcher, you'll learn the golden rule about how to get started, the key mistakes to avoid, and also we'll answer your biggest questions. You can check that out at conservation conservation-careers.com/free. See you soon.